Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. According to one source, there are over 600 unnamed women in the Bible. It was my thought to spend this week looking at some of the unknown women of the Bible, and when I began to look into it, I quickly discovered that this was a much larger topic than I had imagined. Then I realized that it was a more important topic than I had imagined. You see, as you consider these women, what becomes clear is that even though they are somewhat minor characters in the story of God and God's people, they are all in all ways everyday characters in that story, just like you and me. They didn't have grand roles in the scheme of things, but God was still active in and through them, just like us. So this week I'm going to briefly share the stories of 20 of these women, and while I won't have time to go in depth, perhaps there will be important things to learn about our own place in God's story. You can be sure that, just like them, we have one. Today we will start with the woman of Tekoa. She is part of a story that is full of drama, violence, and family discord, such that we might see on TV today. King David had a son, Amnon, who raped his half-sister, and to avenge the deed, another son, Absalom, killed Amnon and then fled. It was tearing the nation apart. Some thought that what Absalom did was justified, and others thought that Absalom should be brought to justice. King David wasn't helping matters by keeping Absalom banished. So David's general, Joab, called a wise woman from Tekoa who told the king a story about her husband dying and then her two sons fighting in a field until one killed the other. The townspeople wanted to execute her only remaining son for this deed, and she was pleading for his life. When King David told her he would give orders to spare her son, she quickly pointed out that this was really a story about King David and Absalom, and that David should forgive Absalom and bring him home. And that's what David did. And perhaps from this story we learn about mercy, grace, and the importance of forgiveness. The woman of Thebes has a story with an odd twist at the end. There was a man named Abimelech who was leading an army against several cities in Israel that were rebelling against his rule. The stories of some of the battles are found in Judges 9, and it's fair to say that Abimelech was fairly ruthless. When he came up against the city of Thebes, he quickly took the city, but in the center of the city they had a tower, often called a keep, that the people fled to. So Abimelech, as he had done in other cities, planned to burn it and all the people inside as well. However, as he drew near the tower, a woman on the roof threw an upper millstone down and bashed Abimelech in the head. As he lay there dying, he asked a nearby soldier to kill him with his sword so that it wouldn't be said that a woman killed him. That's what the soldier did, and when Abimelech was dead, the army went home. The Bible wraps up this story by saying this is how some of those who are evil got what they deserved, and then how Abimelech met his end for his crimes. The whole saga ended through the actions of that woman. Next, we want to turn to Mrs. Job. Mrs. Job is the only name we can give her, but for although she had a speaking part, she is never given her own name. We often consider the plight of Job, who lost his children and all his flocks and herds. His friends tell him he must have done something in order for God to bring this calamity on him, and that he should accept responsibility, curse God, and die. His wife agrees. Job 2, verse 9 says, "Then his wife said to him, 'Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die.' But he said to her, "You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now, we might look askance at Mrs. Job for her words, but perhaps we have never considered that she endured all those calamities just as Job himself had. Those children who died were her children also, and their riches hers too. The pain in her heart was real, and she was angry at God. Sometimes I have people in my congregation who get angry at God, often after the death of someone they love. I generally tell them that that's okay. God is big enough to take our anger and still love us. Maybe in the end, Mrs. Job learned that too. Finally, for today, we want to learn about Philip's daughters. I praised it that way because I didn't know about Philip's daughters, and so as I learned about them, I thought maybe you might not know about them either. Let me remind you who Philip was. One of the disciples of Jesus was named Philip, but that's not this person. In the early church, part of their fellowship was a community meal every time they gathered. Very early on, the apostles noticed that they were so busy preparing and serving the meal that they had no time to preach about Jesus. So they appointed 7 deacons to serve the meal while the apostles got on with their preaching. Only, the first thing these deacons do is go out and preach themselves. One of them was Stephen, who was the first Christian martyr. He was killed for speaking openly about Jesus. Another of these deacons was Philip, and he was sent by the Holy Spirit to preach to an Ethiopian eunuch. Well, at the end of his 3rd missionary journey, Paul was headed to Jerusalem to give them the collection he had received from the churches he had founded on his journey, and Acts 20 and 21 give a detailed description of their trip. As he gets to Israel, the boat stops at Caesarea, and while docked there, Paul and his companions went to the house of Philip, who was one of those 7 deacons. We are told that Philip had 4 unmarried daughters who had the gift of prophecy. That's about all we know about them, but it is clear that they were faithful believers. While he was there, another prophet came and told Paul that he would be arrested in Jerusalem, but Paul was determined to go ahead with his plans. These everyday women were part of God's story among us. In our everyday lives, we can be part of God's story too. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.